At Thanksgiving dinner, I thought the cruelest thing Tyler could do was call me just a poster girl in front of my husband's family. But the real wound came when Ethan, the man who promised to stand beside me, said nothing. Then Frank looked across the table and asked one quiet question. "What was your call sign?" When I answered, "Jukebox," the room changed. They had mistaken my silence for weakness and judged a woman they never truly knew. Before we begin, comment below what city you're watching from. And if stories like this touch your heart, please subscribe to the channel for more emotional family stories. By the time Tyler Bennett called me a poster girl, the rain had been tapping against the dining room windows for nearly an hour. It was a cold Thanksgiving evening in Virginia Beach, the kind where the damp air seemed to follow everyone inside, no matter how quickly the door was closed. The glass behind Frank Bennett's dining table had fogged at the edges, blurring the dark outline of the backyard and turning the reflected chandelier into a soft, trembling glow. On the table, everything looked exactly the way a family holiday was supposed to look. Carved turkey on a white platter, sweet potatoes under browned marshmallows, green bean casserole cooling at the edges, cranberry sauce in a glass bowl, and too many hands passing too many dishes with polite smiles. I remember thinking, almost foolishly, that maybe the evening would pass without incident. I was not wearing my uniform. I had chosen a cream sweater, dark jeans, and small gold earrings because I wanted to look like Ethan's wife, not like Lieutenant Commander Claire Bennett. For one night, I wanted to be simply a daughter-in-law at a Thanksgiving table, someone who asked for gravy, helped clear plates, laughed at harmless jokes, and went home tired but unhurt. Ethan sat beside me, close enough that our sleeves brushed whenever one of us reached for a glass. He had been quiet most of the evening, but Ethan was often quiet around his family. I used to believe that meant he was thoughtful. Over the years, I had started to understand that sometimes it meant he was measuring the safest possible silence. Across from us, Tyler leaned back in his chair with the confidence of someone who had never had to wonder whether the room would forgive him. He was Frank's son, younger than Ethan by several years, and he had inherited his father's sharp jaw without inheriting his discipline. Tyler had always found little ways to joke about my career. At first, the comments came dressed as compliments. He would say the Navy must love putting someone like me in front of cameras, or that I probably made recruitment posters look expensive. People would smile because the words sounded harmless if no one listened too closely. I had learned, in the military and in marriage, that not every insult arrived with a raised voice. Some arrived wrapped in laughter, placed gently on the table, and left there for everyone to pretend not to see. That night, Tyler started small. He asked if I had been in any new glossy brochure lately. Someone gave a short laugh. I smiled without showing my teeth and reached for my water. Then he asked if I ever got tired of being the Navy's favorite image of progress. His mother murmured his name, but not firmly enough to stop him. I felt Ethan shift beside me. For 1 second, I thought he might speak. Instead, he took a sip of wine and looked down at his plate. Tyler saw the opening. Men like him always did. He grinned, lifted his fork toward me, and said, "Come on, Claire. We all know how this works. You're just a poster girl. Some people serve and some people look good standing next to the flag." The room changed before anyone moved. It was as if the air had been pulled out through the ceiling. A cousin coughed into her napkin. Someone's knife touched a plate with a tiny, bright sound. I sat still, because stillness was the only thing I trusted in that moment. Heat rose along my neck, but my hands were cold in my lap. I had been underestimated before. I had been spoken over, doubted, corrected by men who knew less than I did, and smiled at by people who mistook composure for permission. But hearing it at that table, in front of my husband's family, was different. It made me feel suddenly foolish for every holiday I had tried to soften myself for them. Still, what cut deepest was not Tyler's face or the laughter that almost happened and then died. It was Ethan. My husband did not laugh, but he did not defend me. His jaw tightened. His eyes stayed lowered. He chose the peace of the room over the dignity of the woman sitting beside him. Then Frank Bennett set down his glass. Frank had been quiet for most of dinner, the way retired military men sometimes were when they were listening more than speaking. He was a former command master chief, broad-shouldered even in age, with silver hair and a stare that could make a careless person remember his manners. He looked first at Tyler, then at me, and something in his expression changed. "Claire," he said, his voice low and deliberate, "what was your call sign?" I had not expected the question. For a moment, I did not want to answer. My service was not a weapon I liked to bring into family arguments. I had spent years keeping certain parts of my life sealed away, not because I was ashamed, but because some things were too heavy to place before people who only wanted gossip. But Frank's eyes were steady, and there was respect in the way he waited. So I lifted my chin and said, "Jukebox." The effect was immediate. Frank's face went still in a way that frightened the room more than anger would have. His fingers loosened from the napkin beside his plate. He stared at me as if a door had opened somewhere in his memory. "Jukebox," he repeated, almost under his breath. Tyler's smile faded. Ethan finally looked at me, but by then it was too late for the look to matter. Frank leaned back slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, and I knew he had connected the name to Captain Bill Harris, to a night almost no one in that room knew anything about, to a version of me they had never bothered to imagine. Then Frank turned to his son, and his voice carried the weight of every silence that had come before it. "You have no idea who you just insulted." After Frank said those words, no one at the Thanksgiving table knew what to do with the silence. Tyler looked as if he wanted to laugh again, but could no longer find the nerve. Ethan's hand moved once near his glass, then stopped. I remember the rain against the window more clearly than any apology that did not come. It sounded steady, almost patient, as if the world outside had no interest in the small humiliation unfolding inside that warm dining room. But for me, that moment did not begin with Tyler's sentence. It had been building for years, one small comment at a time, so carefully disguised as humor that I had almost trained myself not to hear it. I had been married to Ethan Bennett for 7 years by then. When we first met, his quietness felt like gentleness. He never asked me to explain what I could not talk about. He never pushed for stories from deployments or treated my career like a trophy he could display. After years of being measured, tested, and watched in rooms where a woman had to be twice as calm to be called competent, I mistook Ethan's lack of pressure for understanding. Maybe, in the beginning it was. Or maybe I simply wanted it to be. The Bennett family had always spoken proudly about service. Frank's old photographs lined the hallway of that Virginia Beach house. Frank in dress uniform, Frank at retirement, Frank shaking hands with men whose names were spoken with reverence during holidays. The family treated those frames almost like family scripture. Every Thanksgiving, someone would point to one of them and say something about sacrifice, honor, or the Old Navy. And I respected that. I respected Frank's career, his discipline, the life his family had built around long absences and hard expectations. But over time, I began to notice that their respect had a shape. It fit men like Frank. It fit the past. It fit black and white stories that had already been approved by time. It did not quite know what to do with me. I was not a framed photograph. I was not a retired man with silver hair and a voice that made people straighten in their chairs. I was a woman still serving, still working, still carrying responsibilities I could not neatly explain over mashed potatoes. Because I kept my private life private, the Bennetts filled the silence for me. Patricia, Ethan's aunt, once told me I looked too polished to have the stressful kind of Navy job. She meant it as a compliment, or at least she wanted it to sound like one. Another cousin asked if officers like me mostly went to ceremonies and public events. I answered politely, because correcting every assumption would have turned every family gathering into a classroom, and I was tired of teaching people who had not asked to learn. Tyler was different. His comments had a sharper rhythm. He knew exactly where to place them. At a Labor Day cookout, when someone asked about my work, he said, "Claire probably can't tell us." Classified photo shoots. People laughed, and I smiled because it seemed smaller to smile than to stop the room. At Christmas, he said I was probably better at standing beside flags than briefing strategy. At Frank's birthday dinner, he joked that the modern Navy needed good optics, and his eyes landed on me just long enough for me to understand the target. Each time, I looked at Ethan. Each time, he chose the easier exit. Sometimes, he changed the subject. Sometimes he gave a soft, uncomfortable laugh. Sometimes, later in the car, he would say, "You know how Tyler is." Those words began to wear on me more than Tyler's jokes. You know how Tyler is. As if a man's repeated disrespect was a weather pattern. As if the best response was to carry an umbrella and stop expecting the sky to change. I told myself Ethan did not want conflict. I told myself not every slight deserved a scene. I told myself that my work, my record, and my own knowledge of myself were enough. And most days, they were. I did not need Tyler Bennett to understand my career. I did not need Patricia to stop measuring my competence against my face. I did not need that hallway of old photographs to make room for me. But marriage was different. A wife should not have to stand alone in a room where her husband hears the insult clearly. There were moments when I almost said something. Once, after Tyler made a remark about recruiting posters, I stood in Patricia's kitchen rinsing dessert plates while Ethan dried them beside me. The house was loud behind us, everyone talking over football highlights in the den. I looked at him and said, "Does it bother you when he says things like that?" Ethan paused, dish towel in hand, and I watched him calculate. Not feel, calculate. Finally, he said, "I think he's just insecure around you." I waited for more. There was no more. No promise to speak to him. No anger on my behalf. Just an explanation offered like a blanket too thin to keep anyone warm. That was the first time I understood Ethan could identify the problem and still choose not to touch it. By the Thanksgiving when Frank asked for my call sign, I had already spent years making myself smaller in that house. I had worn softer clothes, changed subjects, swallowed corrections, and let careless comments pass because I believed dignity meant restraint. But there is a difference between restraint and erasure. Tyler had not simply been joking. He had been building a version of me, one dinner at a time, until people around that table could believe I was decoration before they believed I was capable. And Ethan, with every lowered gaze and every nervous change of subject, had allowed that version to stand. The drive home from Frank Bennett's house felt longer than it should have. Virginia Beach was slick with rain, the road shining black under the streetlights, each passing car throwing pale streaks across the windshield before disappearing into the dark. Ethan drove with both hands on the wheel, his shoulders set high, his eyes fixed on the road as if concentration could excuse silence. I sat beside him with my coat folded over my lap, still feeling the weight of that dining room around me. I could still see Tyler's face when Frank said, "You have no idea who you just insulted." I could still feel the shift in the room, the sudden discomfort, the way everyone seemed to understand that something had happened without understanding exactly what. But the moment that replayed most sharply was not Frank's recognition or Tyler's fading smile. It was Ethan looking down at his plate while I waited for him to choose me. For several miles, neither of us spoke. The wipers dragged back and forth, clearing the rain just long enough for the next wave to blur the glass again. Finally, Ethan exhaled and said, "I'm sorry." His voice was quiet, almost careful. I turned my head toward him. I had imagined those words in the dining room. I had imagined them, said firmly, in front of Tyler, before the damage settled. Hearing them now, inside the dim car, made them feel smaller than they should have. "For what?" I asked. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "For not saying something sooner." That last word sat between us. Sooner. Not immediately. Not when it mattered. Sooner, as if he had simply missed a cue in a conversation. He kept speaking, saying he had not wanted to make the dinner worse, that Tyler had already embarrassed himself, that Frank had handled it. I listened until I understood that Ethan thought his mistake was timing. He did not yet understand that his silence had been a decision. "You didn't want to make the dinner worse," I said. "But you were willing to let it be worse for me." He glanced at me then, wounded by the accuracy of it. but he did not deny it. That was the beginning of another kind of silence, one that followed us into the house and stayed there long after we had hung up our coats. 3 days later, Frank called me himself. His voice on the phone was gruff, formal, almost awkward. He asked if I would meet him for coffee. Not at his house, not with the family, but at a small diner near the water where the windows looked out toward a gray strip of winter beach. I almost said no. Part of me was tired of Bennett family conversations, tired of being explained, defended, judged, or repaired by people who had all found courage after the public moment had passed. But something in Frank's tone made me agree. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a booth near the back, a ceramic mug in front of him, his coat folded beside him with the same precision he probably used on uniforms decades earlier. He stood when I approached. That small gesture nearly undid me, not because it was dramatic, but because it was simple respect, offered without performance. We sat across from each other while a waitress refilled his coffee and asked if I wanted anything. I ordered tea, though I knew I would not drink much of it. Frank did not begin with soft apologies. He did not tell me Tyler had not meant it, or that families sometimes said foolish things, or that I should let the holiday pass. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then said, "Claire, my son has been talking about you that way for years." I had expected something unpleasant. I had not expected the sentence to feel like a door opening beneath my feet. Frank told me Tyler had made comments at barbecues, birthdays, and family phone calls when I was not there. He had suggested that my career looked better on paper than it was in practice. He had said the Navy liked promoting certain faces now, that I was useful for optics, that people like me were easy to celebrate because we photographed well. He had not always said it cruelly. That was part of the danger. Sometimes he said it like analysis, sometimes like humor, sometimes like he was revealing an uncomfortable truth everyone else was too polite to name. And because I was private, because I did not bring my records to dinner or turn my service into family entertainment, some people believed him. Not fully, perhaps, not with open malice, but enough to tilt their heads when I spoke, enough to smile too quickly when Tyler joked, enough to let a false version of me stand in rooms I had never entered. Frank's face tightened as he spoke. "I heard pieces of it," he said. More than once, I told myself he was mouthing off. I told myself people who knew better would know better. He looked out the window at the wet parking lot, where gulls moved along the curb like scraps of white paper in the wind. That was cowardice dressed up as patience. I had not expected him to say that. I had expected defense. Fathers defended sons. Families protected their own mythology. But Frank did not soften the truth. He said Tyler had grown up wanting attention without earning the weight that came with it. He said his son had confused visibility with respect, confidence with credibility. Then he looked back at me, and for the first time, the old Command Master Chief seemed less like a symbol in a hallway photograph and more like a tired father realizing he had failed to correct something when it was still small. "I'm ashamed," he said. "Not because you proved him wrong. Because he should have known better before anyone had to prove anything." I did not cry in that diner. I wanted to. The feeling rose behind my eyes, hot and sudden, but I held it there until it faded into something colder. Frank's honesty did not heal the wound. It widened it. Thanksgiving had not been a careless joke that landed badly. It had been the visible tip of something that had been growing behind my back for years. While I had been choosing restraint, Tyler had been choosing narration. While I had been protecting the peace, Ethan had been allowing that peace to cost me my name. I thanked Frank for telling me the truth. He nodded once, as if he knew thanks was not really the right word, but accepted it, because neither of us had a better one. When I stepped outside, the wind off the water cut through my coat, and the rain had become a fine mist that touched my face like cold dust. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. I did not feel angry yet. I felt clarified. Thanksgiving had not been an accident. It had been the first time I heard out loud the story Tyler had been writing about me all along. Renee Parker called me the following Tuesday morning, just after 7, before I had finished my first cup of coffee. I knew from the way her name lit up my phone that it was not a casual call. Renee did not call early unless something mattered. We had known each other for almost 9 years, long enough for her to understand the difference between my silence and my calm. She worked in military communications, close enough to the public-facing side of service to know how easily a photograph could be turned into a message and how dangerous that message could become when the wrong person controlled it. I answered in the kitchen while Ethan was upstairs getting ready for work. The house was quiet, except for the low hum of the refrigerator, and the rain still ticking lightly against the back window. For a moment, I thought Renee might be calling about Thanksgiving. By then, I had told her enough for her to understand why my voice had sounded different the day after. But she did not begin with sympathy. She said, "Claire, I need you to listen before you react." Those words made my hand tighten around the mug. Renee told me she had been asked to review materials for a military media event at Naval Station Norfolk, a professional development session about public image, recruitment messaging, and representation. Tyler's name had come through as one of the civilian presenters attached to a communications panel. That alone would have annoyed me, but not surprised me. Tyler had built a career out of sounding informed in rooms where other people had done the harder work. Then Renee's voice changed. She said his draft presentation included a slide about how institutions sometimes elevate image over competence. The slide used a photograph of me, not a formal portrait I had approved, not an official biography image. It was a cropped photo from a public event 2 years earlier, where I had been standing near a flag during a recognition ceremony. My name was not written in full, but the image was clear. Anyone who knew me would know. Anyone in that community might recognize me. Beneath the photo, Tyler had written a caption that Renee read aloud slowly, as if the words disgusted her. When symbolism becomes a substitute for substance. For a few seconds, I said nothing. The kitchen seemed to narrow around me. I had been insulted before, but this felt different from Thanksgiving. At the dinner table, Tyler had been cruel in front of family. This was deliberate, prepared, packaged. He had taken my image, stripped away my name, my work, my years, and turned me into evidence for an argument he had already decided to make. Renee said, "This isn't just family disrespect anymore. He is using you to teach people how to doubt women in uniform." That sentence settled heavily because it was true. I could have handled being disliked. I could even have handled being misunderstood. But being used as a prop in my own erasure felt like something I could not swallow quietly. I asked Renee to send me what she could. She hesitated, then said she would send enough for me to understand, without compromising her own position. A minute later, the image appeared on my phone. There I was, in uniform, cropped neatly beneath Tyler's caption. I contacted Tyler that afternoon. I kept the message short, professional, and clear. I told him he did not have my permission to use my image, that the caption was misleading, and that I expected the slide to be removed immediately. He replied 3 hours later, with the kind of confidence only a cornered man mistakes for strength. He said the photo came from a public source. He said the slide was not about me personally. He said I was reading hostility into an academic discussion. Then, as if he could not help himself, he added that I was being overly sensitive. I stared at that phrase until the screen dimmed. Overly sensitive. It was the emergency exit for people who wanted the freedom to wound without the responsibility of being named. I forwarded the message to Ethan before he came home, not because I expected him to fix it, but because I wanted him to see it before he tried to soften it. His reaction told me more than I wanted to know. Ethan stood in the kitchen, tie loosened, phone in hand, reading the messages twice. He looked troubled, even angry, but the anger had no direction. "He's an idiot," he said finally. "But maybe don't turn this into a bigger thing than it already is." I felt something inside me go very still. "He's using my photograph in a presentation at Norfolk," I said, with a caption questioning my competence. Ethan rubbed his forehead. I know it's wrong. I just don't want this to blow up the whole family." There it was again, the family, that soft, sacred word used like a locked door. I looked at my husband and realized he still saw the problem as a private Bennett mess that had gotten out of hand. I saw something else. I saw a man taking my face into a professional room and asking strangers to doubt the substance behind it. I saw the same old insult moving from a dining table to a projector screen. I did not call Frank. I did not post Tyler's slide online. I did not write a furious email to everyone attached to the event, though part of me wanted to. Rage would have been easy, and maybe even satisfying for a minute, but it would have let Tyler pretend the issue was my reaction instead of his behavior. So I chose the one response he had not prepared for. I registered for the session at Naval Station Norfolk under my own name. I printed a copy of the slide Renee had sent, folded it once, and placed it in my bag. When Ethan asked what I intended to do, I told him the truth. I was going to sit in that room. I was going to listen, and if Tyler had the courage to use my image to question my worth, I wanted to see whether he had the courage to do it while looking at me. The morning of Tyler's presentation came in gray and wet, as if the sky over Norfolk had decided not to fully wake. A thin rain moved across the parking lot at Naval Station Norfolk, pushed sideways by wind coming off the harbor. I sat in my car for a moment after turning off the engine, watching people hurry toward the building with folders tucked under coats and collars lifted against the weather. My reflection looked back at me from the dark window, hair pinned neatly, face composed, uniform pressed, expression controlled enough that no one passing by would have known my pulse was steady only because I had forced it to be. I had spent my career learning how to enter rooms that were not built with my comfort in mind. This room should not have felt any different. Still, as I picked up my bag and stepped into the rain, I could feel the folded copy of Tyler's slide inside it, like a small, sharp weight. I was not there to shout. I was not there to humiliate him for pleasure. I was there because silence had become too expensive. The conference room was already half full when I arrived. Rows of chairs faced a screen at the front, where the Navy emblem glowed faintly from the projector. There were active duty officers, retirees, civilian communications staff, a few younger service members taking notes before the session even started, and several guests wearing name badges clipped to jackets. The air smelled of coffee, damp wool, and printer paper. Renee was seated near the back, and when she saw me, her face tightened with relief and worry at the same time. She did not wave. She only gave a small nod, the kind that said she was with me, but understood this had to be mine. Ethan arrived 5 minutes later. I had not asked him to come, and I had not asked him to stay away. He slipped into a seat 2 rows behind me, looking tense and pale under the fluorescent lights. I felt him there more than I saw him. For once, his silence did not comfort me or hurt me. It simply waited to be measured. Tyler walked to the front with his laptop tucked under one arm and the same easy confidence he had worn at Thanksgiving. He looked polished in a navy blazer, open-collar shirt, and brown shoes too carefully chosen to seem effortless. If he was surprised to see me, he hid it well at first. His eyes passed over the room, landed on mine for less than a second, and moved on. That told me everything. He had known I might come. He had decided to perform anyway. He began with jokes about modern audiences, recruitment challenges, and the importance of narrative. People listened politely. Some laughed when he wanted them to. He spoke smoothly about symbolism, visibility, public trust, and the danger of mistaking a strong image for a strong institution. In another context, some of it might even have sounded intelligent. That was what made men like Tyler dangerous. They could wrap resentment in professional language and make it look like insight. Then the slide appeared. For one quiet second, the room did not understand. My photograph filled the left side of the screen. I was standing near a flag at a ceremony 2 years earlier, cropped so the context was gone. Beneath it, in clean white type, were the words Renee had read to me over the phone. When symbolism becomes a substitute for substance. I heard someone shift in a chair. I heard Renee inhale behind me. Ethan made no sound at all. Tyler turned slightly toward the screen, then back to the audience, and I saw the exact moment he realized I was still looking at him. He started to speak, but before he could make my face into his lesson, I stood. My legs were steady. That surprised me. My voice was steadier. "Mr. Bennett," I said. The title made several heads turn. Tyler blinked. "Before you continue, I have 3 questions. The room sharpened around us. He gave a strained smile and said, "Claire, maybe we can discuss this after." I did not move. "First, did you request permission to use that image?" His smile thinned. "It was publicly available." "That was not my question," I said. "Did you request permission?" A pause. "No." I nodded once. "Second, before using that photograph to suggest symbolism without substance, did you verify the service record, qualifications, or operational background of the person in the image?" His face colored. "This slide is not about one individual, it's about broader messaging." "Then my third question should be easy," I said. "Are you willing to tell this room that the woman on that screen is only a symbol and that there is no substance behind her?" No one breathed loudly. Tyler looked toward the moderator, then toward his laptop, then back at me. The confidence had begun to drain from him, leaving something younger and less certain underneath. "You're taking this personally," he said. "It's a general example." Before I could respond, a voice from the side of the room cut through the air. "It is not general if you used her face." Captain William Harris was seated near the front, one of the honored guests listed on the program. I had known he might be there, but knowing and hearing his voice were two different things. He turned in his chair, studied me for a long moment, and then his expression changed with recognition. "Jukebox," he said quietly. The room seemed to tilt. Tyler stared at him, confused. Captain Harris stood slowly. He did not make a speech. He did not dramatize the past. He only said, "The officer in that photograph is one of the reasons I am alive. She was there on a night most people in this room will never hear about, and she carried more substance than most people ever have to prove." That was all. It was enough. The room did not erupt. There was no applause, no grand vindication, no theatrical collapse. There was only the heavy silence of people realizing what had been placed in front of them. Tyler stood beside his own slide, pale and exposed, trapped by the image he had chosen to misuse. For a moment, after Captain Harris spoke, the room seemed unable to return to itself. The projector still glowed behind Tyler, my photograph still filling the screen, but the caption beneath it had changed without changing at all. "When symbolism becomes a substitute for substance." Those words no longer sounded clever. They sounded careless, smaller, almost childish. I could see people looking from the slide to me, then to Captain Harris, then back to Tyler, as if they were rearranging the facts in their minds. Tyler stood at the front, with one hand still near the remote, his mouth slightly open, his face drained of the bright confidence he had carried into the room. He had expected discomfort, maybe even anger. He had expected to control the interpretation. What he had not expected was for the person in the photograph to have a name the room would respect more than his opinion. He cleared his throat. "I didn't know," he said. His voice came out thinner than before. "I obviously didn't know the full context." The phrase almost made me laugh, though there was no humor in me. Full context. As if my life were a caption he had failed to expand. As if my service were a footnote missing from his draft. I looked at him, and for the first time since Thanksgiving, I did not feel the need to make my pain smaller so the room could stay comfortable. "That is exactly the problem," I said. My voice did not rise. It did not need to. "You did not know. You did not ask. You did not verify. But you still felt qualified to use my face to make a judgment about my worth." Tyler looked away, and that small motion told me he had heard the difference between being embarrassed and being accountable. "You keep saying this was not personal," I continued. "But you chose a real person. You chose my image. You chose a caption that questioned substance without doing the work to learn whether substance was there." The moderator stepped forward as if trying to decide whether to intervene, but before she could speak, I heard a chair move behind me. Ethan stood. I did not turn right away. For so many years, I had known the sound of him almost speaking. The breath before a sentence he swallowed. The shift in posture before he chose the safer path. This time, he did not lower his eyes. His voice was uneven. but it carried. "Take the slide down, Tyler." Tyler stared at him, more startled by Ethan than he had been by me, maybe because he had never expected Ethan to make a room uncomfortable on purpose. "Ethan," Tyler said, warning in his tone, as if family rules still applied. Ethan stepped into the aisle. "No, take it down, right now, and apologize to Claire in front of the same room where you used her image. It was not a perfect defense. It came late. It did not erase Thanksgiving or the years before it. But it was the first time my husband had put a boundary between me and his family where other people could see it." Tyler's jaw worked. For a second, I thought he might refuse. Then Captain Harris remained standing, silent but unmistakable, and the moderator quietly said, "Mr. Bennett, remove the slide." Tyler turned to his laptop with stiff hands. The screen went blank, and somehow that blankness felt louder than the image had. He faced the room again, but he did not look at me when he said, "I apologize if the slide gave the wrong impression." Ethan's voice cut in, sharper now. "That is not an apology." I finally looked back at him. His face was pale, but something in him had steadied. Tyler swallowed. "Claire," he said, forcing himself to meet my eyes, "I'm sorry I used your image without permission. I'm sorry I questioned your credibility without knowing your record. The words were there. Whether he understood them was another matter." I nodded once, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement that the room had heard him say what he had avoided saying for years. Then Frank Bennett spoke from the side aisle. I had not seen him come in. Later, I would learn that Renee had called him after sending me the slide, and he had arrived just as the session began. He did not look like an angry father rushing to protect the family name. He looked like a former command master chief, standing in a room where respect had been mishandled. "Tyler," he said, and the name sounded heavier than any rank. "You wore your ignorance like authority today." Tyler flinched. Frank did not raise his voice. "That uniform on the screen represents a person who served. Before you used her face, you owed her the dignity of truth. Before you spoke about substance, you owed the room enough humility to know what you did not know." His eyes moved once to me, then back to his son. "Attention is not respect. A polished argument is not integrity. And if you cannot tell the difference, you have no business teaching anyone about either." The presentation did not continue. People gathered their folders quietly. Some approached Captain Harris. A few looked at me as if they wanted to say something, but did not know what would be useful. Renee came to my side and touched my elbow. Just once. Ethan stood a few feet away, as if he understood that he had earned the right to speak, but not yet the right to be close. By evening, the family had already begun splitting itself into versions of the story. Patricia called Ethan, upset that things had become public. Someone texted that Tyler had been humiliated. Someone else said he had brought it on himself. For the first time, I did not feel responsible for managing their discomfort. Tyler had made his choice in a professional room, under professional lights, with professional consequences. What unsettled me more was Ethan. That night, he apologized again, and this time his voice carried more than regret. But I told him the truth I had been carrying since Thanksgiving. I did not need a husband who felt ashamed after the whole room knew I deserved respect. I needed one who would stand beside me before anyone else confirmed it. Spring did not arrive in Virginia Beach all at once. It came slowly, in small changes I might have missed if I had not been paying attention. The rain softened. The wind off the water lost some of its bite. By March, the bare branches along our street had begun to show small green points, fragile and stubborn, as if the world were testing whether it was safe to begin again. Ethan and I were still living in the same house, still sharing coffee in the morning, still moving around each other in the familiar patterns of marriage. But we did not pretend everything had returned to normal. Normal, I had learned, was sometimes just another word for silence that had lasted long enough to become furniture. We went to counseling twice a month. We had difficult conversations at the kitchen table after dinner, the kind that left both of us tired and quiet, but not in the old way. The old silence had been avoidance. This new silence, when it came, at least had honesty inside it. Ethan changed in ways that would have looked small to anyone else. He stopped laughing when someone made a joke at another person's expense. He stopped saying, "That's just how they are," as if cruelty were a family trait no one could question. When Patricia called one evening and said Tyler had been through enough embarrassment, Ethan did not look at me to see how much I would tolerate. He simply said, "Mom, Tyler created the situation. Claire is not responsible for making it easier for him to live with." His voice shook a little, but he said it. Another time, at Frank's house, a cousin started to make a comment about people being too sensitive these days. Ethan set his fork down and said, "Respect is not sensitivity. It is the minimum." The room went uncomfortable, as Bennett rooms often did when someone finally told the truth. I did not rescue him from that discomfort. I let him sit in it, because that was part of the change, too. He had spent years stepping around the hard moments. Now he was learning that love sometimes meant standing still inside them. I did not reward him too quickly. That might sound cold, but it was not. It was careful. A single public defense at Norfolk could not erase years of private absence. I appreciated what he was trying to do, and I told him when I saw it. But I also told him that trust did not return because someone finally understood the damage. Trust returned when understanding became a pattern. Ethan listened, not perfectly. Sometimes he became defensive. Sometimes he wanted reassurance before I was ready to offer it. But for the first time in our marriage, he stopped asking me to heal faster so he could feel less guilty. That mattered. It did not fix everything. It did not need to. It only needed to be real. Tyler did not contact me for months. I heard about him through the family in fragments. He had stepped away from a few public panels. He was angry at first, then embarrassed, then quiet. Frank rarely mentioned him unless I asked, and I usually did not. I had no interest in tracking Tyler's punishment like a scoreboard. Consequences were not the same as healing. Then, one afternoon in early April, while I was leaving base under a pale, clean sky, my phone rang. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. I stood beside my car for a long moment before answering. His voice, when it came, sounded nothing like the man at the Thanksgiving table. There was no polish in it, no performance. "Claire," he said, "I owe you an apology I should have given a long time ago." I did not make it easy for him by filling the silence. He had always known how to use rooms. I wanted to know whether he could handle one without controlling it. He took a breath and said he had been jealous of me. Not just of my career, but of the way respect seemed to come to me without me chasing it. He said he had spent years trying to sound important in front of people who still saw him as Frank Bennett's son. He had mistaken my quiet for arrogance because my restraint made his own hunger for attention feel exposed. "I turned that into a story about you," he said, "because it was easier than admitting what it said about me." He apologized for using my photograph, for talking about me behind my back, for making my service smaller so he could feel larger beside it. For once, he did not add a defense after the apology. He did not say he had meant well. He did not say I had misunderstood. He let the words stand without asking me to soften them. I told him I accepted that he was trying to apologize. I did not tell him everything was fine. It was not. I did not tell him we could start over, because starting over would have meant pretending the old damage had not happened. "We can start from here," I said, "but only if you understand that respect is not something people should have to beg you for. You do not get to decide who has earned basic dignity after you have already taken it from them." Tyler was quiet. Then he said, "I understand. I did not know if he fully did. Maybe understanding, like trust, had to become a pattern before it could be believed." But I heard something in his voice that had not been there before. Humility, or at least the beginning of it. After the call ended, I sat in my car and looked out toward the water beyond the distant buildings. I thought about Thanksgiving, about the wet windows and the frozen table. I thought about Norfolk, about the blank screen after Tyler removed my photograph, about Captain Harris saying my call sign as if he were returning something that had never belonged to Tyler in the first place. For a while, I had thought those rooms changed who I was. They did not. They only changed what other people were forced to see. My dignity had not been created by Frank's recognition, or Captain Harris's testimony, or Ethan's late courage, or Tyler's apology. It had been mine before any of them spoke. Real respect is not something a person should have to beg for. It is not granted by the loudest voice in the room. It is something a person carries, quietly and steadily, long before the room learns how to name it. Sometimes the miracle is not that a room finally sees your worth. Sometimes the miracle is that God helps you remember your worth before anyone else does. Claire's story is a reminder that dignity does not need applause, and truth does not become truth only when others confirm it. In everyday life, there may be moments when people misunderstand you, underestimate you, or stay silent when you need them most. But God sees the quiet battles, the swallowed pain, and the strength it takes to keep standing with grace. May this story remind you to protect your peace, speak with courage, and never beg for the respect that already belongs to you. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more emotional stories. May God bless you and your family with peace, wisdom, and strength.